When David walked out of our front door for the last time, he didn't take much, just a leather duffel bag, his laptop, and the confidence that I'd never truly make it without him. I remember standing in the doorway, the morning light catching on the edge of that worn bag, the same one he used to carry to his so-called business meetings. It felt like my entire life was leaving with him, packed neatly between lies and designer shirts I'd bought him on clearance sales. He didn't even look back. I stood there until the sound of his car faded down the street, replaced by the ticking of the wall clock, sharp, cold, relentless. That sound became my metronome in the days that followed. Tick for every regret, talk for every memory I wished I could erase. If someone had told me that morning that I'd one day be grateful for this heartbreak, I would have laughed through my tears. But life has a way of stripping you bare before it teaches you how to stand again. Before all of that, before courtrooms, creditors, and whispered pity from neighbors, there was us. David and I met when I was 24. I was working as a teller at a small community bank, fresh out of college, still wearing my mother's old blouses to work. He came in every Friday to deposit checks from his father's construction company. He was confident, charming in a way that made the air around him feel just a little warmer. He used to joke that I counted his money slower than anyone else because I liked seeing him. Maybe I did. Back then, I thought he was the kind of man who could make me feel safe in a world that often felt unpredictable. We got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony behind my grandmother's church. I still remember the way he whispered, "We're going to build something amazing, you'll see." I believed him completely. For nearly a decade, we built a quiet life. We had 2 children, Ava and Marcus, and a modest 3-bedroom home with chipped white paint and a lemon tree in the yard. Every spring, I'd fill jars with homemade lemonade for the kids' stand, and David would grin, pretending to be their first customer. Those were the years that smelled like cut grass and baby powder, simple, soft, certain. David worked in property development, and I managed the books for a local catering business. Between bills, school drop-offs, and long nights balancing our checkbook, we made it work. There was love there, or at least I thought there was. The change began quietly. It started with late nights, first once a week, then most nights. He'd come home with his shirt untucked, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. When I'd ask how his day went, he'd say, "Busy, baby. You wouldn't believe the opportunities coming my way." Then one night, over dinner, he dropped it like a gift. "I've been talking to this guy, Mark," he said, eyes bright with excitement. "He's starting a logistics company, and he wants me to come in as a partner. Real growth potential, sweetheart." He spoke fast, too fast, like someone afraid to lose their own momentum. I smiled because that's what I'd always done, supported, believed, encouraged. "That sounds wonderful," I said, though a small part of me hesitated. We'd been saving that $100,000 for nearly 6 years, every tax refund, every Christmas bonus, every skipped vacation. It was our safety net. Still, when he looked at me with that same spark I'd fallen in love with, I wanted to believe him. "Maybe we can finally move into a better school district," he added. "Ava's almost in middle school. She deserves the best." That line sealed it. Every good father wants better for his kids. And every good mother wants to believe her husband when he says he can make that happen. The following weeks were filled with excitement. David brought home folders and business plans. He showed me spreadsheets and talked about ROI and market gaps, things that sounded impressive, even if I didn't fully understand them. He even took me to see an office space, bare walls, cheap carpeting, but full of promise. "This is where it starts," he told me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. I remember feeling proud. My husband, the entrepreneur, when he asked if I could transfer the money from our joint savings into his business account, I didn't hesitate. "Are you sure we should use all of it?" I asked, half teasing, half nervous. "It's temporary," he promised. "Just until the investors come in. Then we'll triple it." So I did it. I sat at our kitchen table late that night, logged into our account, and watched 6 figures disappear with a few keystrokes. I told myself this was what partnership meant, trusting the person you loved, even when you didn't have all the answers. For the first month, things seemed fine. He'd leave early, come home late, but he looked happy. When he talked about deals closing soon or contracts in review, I believed him because I wanted to, but slowly, I began to notice things that didn't fit. The business phone that never rang when he was home, the investors who never had last names, the smell of unfamiliar perfume that lingered on his shirts, expensive, floral, too young for me. Once, I found a hotel receipt in his jeans pocket. When I asked about it, he laughed. "Meeting with out-of-town partners. You know how these guys are." I told myself I was overthinking. That marriage meant trust. That doubt was poison. But the night he forgot his phone on the counter, everything changed. It buzzed 3 times before I even looked at it. A text appeared, simple but devastating. "Thank you for the transfer, babe. You're my hero." The contact name read S. I stood there frozen, phone in hand, feeling my chest tighten until I could hardly breathe. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. That's how the truth began. Quiet, cruel, and ordinary. That night, I didn't confront him. I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending to be asleep when he turned toward me. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, trying to match mine to it, as if synchronizing with a liar could somehow make the betrayal less real. But deep down, I knew. The next morning while he showered, I sat on the edge of our bed and whispered to myself, "You need to know." It was the first time I'd said it out loud. And once you say the words, you can't unhear them. The next few days were a blur of forced smiles and quiet investigations. I went about my routine like nothing had changed, packed the kids' lunches, paid bills, and answered David's casual texts with emojis and love yous that felt like ash in my mouth. But underneath the routine, I was watching, listening, counting the lies. David's tone changed around me. He had a new kind of politeness, the kind that feels like a closed door. "You're amazing, babe," he'd say absently, scrolling through his phone while I talked about our son's science project. He was present in body but gone in every way that mattered. One afternoon, I decided to visit his office. He'd been saying he was spending 12-hour days there preparing contracts, yet whenever I called, no one answered. The address he'd given me was in an old commercial district, a collection of faded warehouses and converted studios. When I arrived, the space looked abandoned. Dusty windows, no signage, and a for lease notice taped crookedly on the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at that notice, the edges curling under the wind. My hands trembled as I tried the door handle. It was locked. Through the window, I could see an empty room with a few folding chairs stacked against the wall. My stomach dropped. That's when I saw her. A woman stepping out of a dark gray car across the street. Stylish, confident. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with sleek hair, red lipstick, and heels too high for casual errands. She looked around, checked her phone, and waited. I ducked behind my car door, my heart thundering. Moments later, David pulled up. I recognized his car before I even saw his face. He parked, got out, and without hesitation kissed her. It wasn't a nervous kiss. It was familiar. I watched as they laughed, their bodies leaning close like two people who had long ago stopped pretending to be careful. I should have confronted them right there. Should have screamed, should have thrown something. But I didn't. I just stood there, hands gripping the car door so tightly my knuckles went white. When they finally left, I sat alone for nearly an hour, staring at the spot where they'd stood. The world around me looked the same buildings, same cars, but everything inside me had shifted. When I got home, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried quietly under the running shower, just so the kids wouldn't hear. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him empty-handed. If David thought I was naive, then I would use that to my advantage. The next morning, after dropping Ava and Marcus at school, I went to the bank. I had always been careful with our finances, joint accounts, automatic transfers, everything neat and labeled. But now, I opened a separate account in my name only, just in case. The teller, a woman I'd known for years, gave me a kind look. "Everything okay, Ms. Lopez?" I forced a smile. "Just getting my ducks in a row," I said softly. That afternoon, I logged into our shared account and started tracing every transaction. Each one felt like peeling off another layer of truth I hadn't wanted to see. There were charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, flower shops in neighborhoods far from our own, and hotel stays under $300, just enough to avoid raising attention. Then I saw it. A wire transfer, $100,000, not to a business, not to Mark, but to a personal account under the name Samantha Pierce. The same initial I'd seen in the text message. My stomach turned. I sat there staring at the screen until my vision blurred. The betrayal was so calculated, so deliberate. It wasn't a moment of weakness, it was theft, plain and simple. That night, I acted normal, made dinner, helped the kids with homework, and laughed when Marcus showed me his messy drawing of a dragon. But every time I looked at David, I saw a stranger. He talked about big opportunities coming and kissed me goodnight with lips that had touched someone else's skin hours earlier. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until the digital clock blinked past midnight, then got up and opened my laptop again. I needed to know more about her. A simple search for Samantha Pierce led me to a social media profile. She was exactly the woman I'd seen that day, same sleek hair, same sharp smile, Her feed was filled with pictures of wine glasses, weekend getaways, and designer handbags. Her bio read, "Building an empire, one dream at a time." Scrolling further, I found a post from 2 weeks earlier, a table for two, a bottle of champagne, a caption that read, "Here's to new beginnings #partners in success." Double quotes, and there, on the edge of the frame, was David's watch. The one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. My body shook, not from anger yet, but from something colder, the kind of grief that has no sound. The next morning, I called in sick. I told my boss I had a family emergency and then drove straight to my mother's house. She took one look at me and knew, "Something's wrong," she said, setting down her teacup. I told her everything, the business, the transfer, the woman. She listened quietly, her hands folded, her eyes soft but steady. When I finished, she said something I'll never forget. "Men like David don't just steal money, they steal peace. You need to take both back." Her voice was calm, not bitter. It gave me strength. Over the next few days, I began documenting everything: bank statements, screenshots, even the text I'd seen. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew this: I wasn't going to let him walk away with our future. When I looked at my children that week, I saw the reason I had to stay composed. Ava was old enough to sense tension. Marcus kept asking when Daddy would take him to the park again. I smiled and said, "Soon," even though I didn't believe it inside. Though something in me had shifted. I had spent years being the supportive wife, the believer, the steady one. But that version of me had been betrayed. Now, a new version was forming quietly, like iron cooling after fire. The night I decided to confront him, the sky outside was heavy with rain. He came home late again, his shirt damp, his hair slicked back. "Long day?" I asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "Yeah," he said, kissing my cheek. "Clients are killing me." I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a towel. "Tell me about Samantha Pierce," I said evenly. He froze. Just a flicker, but I caught it. "What?" I held up a printed bank statement, the ink still fresh. "I know where the money went." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He didn't speak for what felt like forever. The air between us was thick, charged with a kind of stillness that made my pulse throb in my ears. "Maria," he said finally, his tone calm. "You're misunderstanding." "Stop." My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. "Don't lie, not now. I know exactly what you did." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw twitched, a tell I'd learned over the years when he was caught. I stepped closer, holding up the paper like evidence at a trial. $100,000, David, gone, sent to someone named Samantha Pierce. "I saw you with her. Don't you dare say this is a misunderstanding." For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, but calculation. He was deciding which lie to use. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was going to tell you," he said softly. "It's not what you think." "Oh," I said, the bitterness rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. She's a business partner." He started, and we got close. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Things just got complicated. My voice cracked. "You took our savings. You emptied the account we built for our kids' future and gave it to your mistress." "That's not complicated, David, that's betrayal." He looked away, exhaling sharply. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. You think it's easy trying to make something of myself while you, well, what?" I snapped. "Raise your children. Keep the lights on. Believe every word you said because I trusted you." His silence was an answer. That's when I realized he wasn't sorry. Not really. He was sorry he got caught. I could see it in his posture, in the way he tried to stand tall even as his lies unraveled. The man I had built my life around was a stranger. I turned away, wiping my eyes before the tears could fall. "How long?" He hesitated. "Don't make me ask twice." 6 months, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of smiling at me over dinner, kissing me goodnight, pretending. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I thought about all the moments that now felt poisoned. The flowers he brought just because. The nights he came home late. The mornings he said he loved me before leaving for work. Every memory became a wound. When I finally spoke again, my voice was cold. "You need to leave." He looked startled. "Maria, wait, no, you don't get to stand in this house and lie anymore. You don't get to look at me like I'm some fool who'll forgive you again." The words came faster now, stronger. "I believed in you when no one else did. I worked extra hours, sold my jewelry to help you start your business. And you took that money, our family's future, and handed it to a woman you met on some networking app." He flinched. It wasn't just that. I cared about her. That was the final blow. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sound kept me from screaming. You cared about her, I repeated, shaking my head. Then go care about her somewhere else. He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, he dropped his hand, eyes softening. Maria, please. We can fix this. No, David, you broke this. And I won't glue it back together just so you can shatter it again. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside beat against the windows like the echo of my heart. Finally, he turned toward the door, grabbing his jacket. You'll regret this, he said quietly. I met his eyes. No, I regret ever believing you deserved me. He left. The sound of the door closing was both a heartbreak and a liberation. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the house in silence, every room heavy with memories. The kitchen where we danced barefoot. The hallway where our kids took their first steps. The bedroom that now felt too big, too cold. I thought about calling him, about demanding more answers. But what was the point? The truth was already carved deep. Instead, I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea until dawn. When the sun rose, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, let him go. The days that followed were strange. People noticed something was off. My sister called to ask why I hadn't posted family photos lately. My coworkers asked if everything was okay. I smiled, said I was fine. That's what women do. We survive in silence while the world expects us to smile. But inside, I was rebuilding, quietly, deliberately. I met with a lawyer. I froze the accounts. I gathered every document that proved what he'd done. When David tried to call, I ignored him. When he showed up at the house, I didn't open the door. One night, he left a note under the mat. It read, I made a mistake. Please let me explain. I love you. I burned it in the sink. Weeks passed. One afternoon, as I picked up the kids from school, I saw David's car parked across the street. He waved. I didn't wave back. Later that night, he texted me, Samantha left. I lost everything. Can we talk? For a moment my heart twisted, not out of love but out of pity. The same man who once thought he could build an empire by betraying his family was now adrift. Alone, I typed one message back, I hope you find peace. David, but not here. Then I blocked his number. It took months before I could say his name without feeling anger. I poured my energy into rebuilding the life he had fractured. I took small catering jobs, birthday parties, office lunches, school events. My food became my therapy. Each dish carried a piece of the woman I was becoming, strong, grounded, unbreakable. Word spread. Soon, I was booked weeks in advance. I rented a small kitchen space, printed business cards that read Maria's table, homemade with heart, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of something that was mine then. One evening, almost 2 years later, I saw him again. It was at a local market. I was carrying trays of food for an event when I heard someone call my name. I turned, and there he was. David looked older, tired. The arrogance that once defined him had faded into something hollow. He smiled awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Hey, he said. I nodded. Hey, he glanced at the trays. You've been busy? I have. He hesitated. You look good, Maria. Thanks, I said simply. We stood there for a moment in silence. Then he cleared his throat. I was wondering if maybe we could talk sometime. Just catch up. I looked at him, really looked. For years, I'd imagined this moment, rehearsed what I would say. But standing there, I realized I didn't need words to prove anything. I don't think so, David, I said gently. But I wish you well. He looked down, nodded. You really moved on, huh? Yes, I said, a small smile on my lips. I finally did, and as I walked away, the weight that had lived on my shoulders for years finally lifted. Grief, I learned, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums quietly beneath the skin, like a bruise that refuses to fade. After David left, the house seemed impossibly quiet, too large for me and the kids, too full of ghosts. The sound of the refrigerator hum felt louder. The empty chair across from me at dinner looked heavier. But instead of falling apart, I began rearranging. First, the bedroom. I took down every photograph of us. The smiling beach trip, the anniversary dinner, the one from our wedding where he was kissing my forehead. I replaced them with pictures of the kids and one quote I'd written on a sticky note. You are not broken. You are becoming. Then, the kitchen. That space became my therapy room. The same place where I'd discovered betrayal now smelled of cinnamon, garlic, and new beginnings. I started cooking not to survive, but to heal. Every meal became an act of reclaiming, the chopping of onions, the kneading of dough, the slow simmer of stew that filled the air with something warm and steady. It wasn't long before neighbors began noticing. Mrs. Patel from next door asked if I could make samosas for her granddaughter's birthday. A week later, her friend called for a small dinner order. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was cooking full-time. My kitchen table turned into a workspace. My children helped package boxes before school. We laughed again, sometimes even danced. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. My daughter, Emma, was the first to say it aloud. "Mom," she said one evening as we labeled containers, "you're happier now." I looked at her, smiling faintly. "Am I?" She nodded. "Yeah, it's like, we got you back." Her words hit me hard. Because she was right. Somewhere between being a wife, a mother, and a believer in someone else's dream, I had lost me. Now, I was finding her again. A year later, Maria's table had grown. I was catering small weddings, local events, and family gatherings. The little business that began out of pain had become a symbol of strength. People asked how I did it, how I kept smiling after everything. I never told them the whole story. I just said, sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what you're capable of. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet and the kids asleep, the memories would return. Like faint echoes, his voice, his laugh, the way he once looked at me. But those memories no longer hurt. They just existed, like old scars that didn't ache anymore. One afternoon, I received an email from a local women's business association. They were hosting a panel titled "Starting Over, Stories of Resilience." Someone had nominated me as a guest speaker. I almost declined. Me on stage, talking about my life, but then I thought of the countless women who'd quietly shared pieces of their pain with me at markets, at events, whispering. My husband did something similar. They always said it softly, like a confession, as if their heartbreak was shameful instead of survivable. So, I said yes. The night of the event, I wore a soft blue dress. My hands trembled as I held the microphone. When the lights dimmed and the audience hushed, I took a deep breath and began. "I'm not a businesswoman by training," I said. "I'm just a mother who once believed in someone else's dream more than her own. And when that dream broke, I thought I broke with it." The room was silent, but pain, I continued, can be a strange teacher. It taught me to build, not for someone else this time, but for myself and my children. Every recipe, every client, every long night in the kitchen became a way of telling myself, "You are still here." I saw women nodding, some wiping tears. "When everything falls apart," I said softly, "don't ask, why me? Ask what now? Because that question, what now, is where your healing begins." When I stepped off the stage, people hugged me, thanked me. Some said my story gave them courage to leave bad marriages. Others said it reminded them of their mothers. And for the first time in years, I felt proud, not of surviving but of living. A few months later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was David's mother, Maria. She said gently, "I thought you should know. David's been in the hospital. Heart complications. He's not well." There was a pause. "He keeps asking for you." For a long time, I said nothing. I didn't hate him anymore. That was the strange thing. I'd spent so long healing that hatred no longer had a home in me. "Thank you for letting me know," I said quietly. I didn't visit him, not out of cruelty but because that chapter was closed. Still, one evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sun set, and whispered a silent prayer. "I hope he finds peace too." A year later, I moved to a smaller house, cozy, full of light, with a garden where I grew herbs for my cooking. The kids were older, thriving, strong. Sometimes we talked about their father, not with anger but with honesty. Emma once said, "You know, Mom, I think what he did made us stronger." I nodded. "It did. Pain teaches you things comfort never can." She smiled. "Do you ever miss him?" I thought for a moment. "No, but I remember him, and I'm grateful for what that memory taught me." Life didn't become perfect. It became real. I learned to sleep peacefully again, to laugh without guilt, to love myself without needing someone else's validation. I wasn't waiting for an apology, or a miracle, or a redemption arc. I already had mine, in the form of quiet mornings, full tables, and the soft laughter of my children, because healing doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace, and that peace, it was finally mine. 2 years after everything ended, I found myself standing in front of the same bank where David and I had first met. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. The kind of late afternoon where the world feels quieter than usual. I wasn't there for any grand reason, just to sign paperwork for a business loan expansion. Maria's table had outgrown my home kitchen, and I was finally ready to move into a small commercial space downtown. As I waited for my number to be called, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My hair had a few silver strands now. My hands had small burns from years of cooking, but my eyes, They looked stronger, clearer, like someone who had finally learned how to trust herself. And in that reflection, I realized something. The woman I used to be, the one who waited up at night, who begged for truth, who believed love meant sacrifice, she was gone. In her place stood someone new. I opened Maria's table cafe 6 months later. The sign above the door was simple, white letters on dark wood, but it carried every ounce of my journey. Opening day was chaos, laughter, music, flower, dust in the air. My children worked behind the counter, passing out cookies to customers, their faces glowing with pride. As I moved through the room, people kept hugging me, saying things like, "You did it, and we've been waiting for this." I smiled and nodded, but inside, I thought of all the nights I almost gave up, the ones where I sat in the dark, staring at unpaid bills, wondering how I'd ever rebuild from nothing. And now, here I was, standing in the light of everything I'd built with my own 2 hands. That evening, after we closed, I sat outside with a cup of tea. The city lights blinked softly, like small reminders that life goes on, no matter how hard it tries to break you. Emma joined me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You did it, Mom," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did it." We sat there in silence for a while. No words, just the rhythm of our breathing and the sound of cars passing by. It wasn't a movie ending. There was no dramatic music, no sudden twist of fate. Just peace, quiet, steady, earned peace. A few months later, I received a small brown envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a folded letter. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, careful. "Maria, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I thought money and excitement could fill something empty in me, but all it did was hollow me out more. I hope you and the kids are happy. You deserve that." Davide read it once, then twice. Then I set it down on the table and breathed, not sadness, not anger, just closure. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I simply whispered, "I already forgave you," even though he would never hear it. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't about giving someone else peace. It's about freeing yourself from their shadow. These days, my mornings begin with the smell of coffee beans and cinnamon rolls. I still get tired, still worry about bills, still make mistakes, but none of it feels heavy anymore. Some wounds never fully disappear, but they stop defining you once you decide they won't. I sometimes think back to that version of me who transferred our savings, her trembling hands, her blind faith, her love that refused to see red flags. I used to pity her. Now I thank her, because without her, her trust, her hope, her heartbreak, I wouldn't be who I am now. That woman walked through fire, and she came out softer, not weaker. Life, I've realized, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you build from it. And sometimes, the most beautiful things are born from the ashes of what we thought would destroy us. When people ask how I survived losing $100,000 and my husband in one breath, I tell them the truth. I didn't just survive. I started over. Before I close this chapter, I want to say something to anyone listening who's been betrayed, lied to, or broken by someone they trusted. You are not the sum of what they did to you. You are not foolish for loving, and you are never too far gone to start again. Heartbreak doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care deeply, and that's something worth honoring. So tell me, dear listener, if someone you loved betrayed you, not just emotionally, but in the very foundation of your trust, would you have forgiven them, or would you have walked away like I did and built something new from the ruins? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story, and if my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, so more people who feel lost can remember, healing is possible and peace is waiting. Because in the end, the money may have been stolen, the marriage may have broken, but my soul, my strength, those were never his to take.